Hello, welcome. My name is Renee Gittins, and this is the Game Development Crisis Conference and Webinar Series. This conference is intended to equip game developers and studio leadership with the knowledge and tools they need to sustain successful development in the times of crisis. These expert panels are dedicated to the skills and tools for working from home, studio leadership in times of change, and mental health considerations and resources for game developers. These panels are brought to you by a collaboration between the IGDA and Take This. IGDA's mission is to support and empower game developers around the world in achieving fulfilling and sustainable careers. And Take This's mission is to decrease the stigma and increase the support for mental health in the game enthusiast community and inside the game industry. If you'd like to donate to Take This's cause, please donate to the link below. And we'd also like to extend a special thanks to our sponsor, Xbox. Their dedication to helping all gamers and game developers helps make programs like this possible. Today's panel is on technical solutions for remote development, and I am joined today by John Combs, the design director at Utopos Games, and Kris Kwilas, the operations engineer at Oxide Games. John, Kris, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Sure, I'll go first. I'm John Combs. I'm a almost 20-year veteran of the industry. I've worked for the likes of Westwood Studios, EA, Gas Powered Games, Uber Entertainment, Tiny Build, and about a year ago I started my own studio called Utopos Games with some friends and former coworkers that I worked with at Westwood way back in the day. I've done everything from, I started out as a game designer, but I've done a ton of engineering and production and marketing, and yeah, I've done pretty much every role you can have in the games industry. So,
truly a jack of all trades.
I don't really like that term as a quick aside. It assumes that, like, if you're not good at one thing, if you're good at one thing, you can't be good at other things. We're humans and we can be masters of all things. I'm not a master of all things, but sorry, just a little aside, something I believe in.
That's fine.
So my name's Kris. I've been in the games industry for the better part of 25 years now, almost exclusively with Stardock or associated studios. But we've worked with other people like Gas Powered Games, Ironclad Entertainment, Sins of a Solar Empire, built and sold a couple of digital distribution systems to GameStop, and am still somehow gainfully employed. Yeah, so that.
Great. Well, clearly both of you are experts within the game industry, and that's why you're here today. Obviously, with the COVID-19 pandemic, things have been changing for everyone within the game industry and outside of it. Are there any particular challenges that are arising within the game industry around the current pandemic?
I've seen a few. A lot of the studios that don't work remotely are being forced to now, which is there is ramp up time based on the technology to be used. There's the lack of FaceTime. There's nothing in a creative environment that replaces like actually talking to somebody and seeing their facial responses and that sort of thing. Text doesn't do it quite as well, so there's a ramp up of getting used to that. There's, of course, the mental health issues, just being around other people and being stuck in a house all the time. I'm sure I can think of more, but I'll let Kris come up with a few.
I mean, one of the things that we've found is that the lack of social contact is more troubling than you would think. We were set up for remote work beforehand, though not everybody was doing it. So it was a quick transition in literally the span of a week to set up the infrastructure to make sure that everyone would be able to collaborate remotely. And we're still making active use of Microsoft Teams and other solutions, you know, to be able to troubleshoot when people are having problems that you just can't walk over to somebody's desk and make sure that they're able to get their shit done.
Right. So
we actually lucked out a little bit with that, in that my studio, even though we're small right now, we were remote to begin with. I'm near Seattle. My lead artist is here in Seattle, but the rest of the team is in Las Vegas. So we're constantly remote, but I used to go down there once a month to be with the team for that exact reason. Unfortunately, now I can't go down there once a month because I can't fly.
So it seems that both of your teams were able to transition or already were managing remote development quite well. Does switching to remote development change the technology needs of a studio?
I don't know if I'd say we've changed quite well. It is a tough change, as Kris said. It's actually really hard, but there's enough software and services out there to make the change. It's more being diligent as a team to make sure you use them in such a way. Like we found working remotely, that nothing that we have to understand a point in which we should just jump on a call, and that took us a while to learn. We would have these long discussions over text, realizing we're spending an hour writing text, pages, and everybody's missing each other because you can't. Text is really hard to understand intent, and it took us a while to realize. At some point, somebody says, "Let's just jump on a call."
Yeah, we make sure to have some regularly scheduled calls for each of the various teams and groups within the organization, as well as our weekly stand-up. The other thing that we've been relying more heavily on than I think we appreciated before is making sure that we have task management tools, of which we did. We're using Azure DevOps, but things like Jira and Trello are also readily available for everyone to use. But making sure that you are able to actively communicate with the people involved that these things are getting done, these things are not getting done, what needs to be done.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So have you found that the change in communication requires more video calls versus voice calls, or that these task tracking systems are getting more use made out of them?
I definitely prefer video calls over chat calls, again, because you get to see facial expressions. Like, if I throw out a design idea and somebody winces, then it's like, okay, what is it you don't like about it? And you don't get that over voice. Us for task tracking, we've been Trello users because we're so small. It works for us. I've been on much bigger teams, and I know that if we grew past 7 or 8 people, then we would have to think more about what task tracking software we use. Because in my career, I've found that once you get past 7 people, you need somebody who is more of a producer, and Trello does a decent job at that, but once you get even bigger, it kind of falls down.
Right.
Yeah, we're now at about 55 people, so we're no longer quite small. But the availability of everyone is flexible given the asynchronous nature of our work these days. So having a producer who is on top of managing that schedule, working with the leads to make sure things are getting addressed, and tackling our burn down issues is very helpful.
So Kris, I know that Oxide doesn't necessarily have as many producers as other studios of a similar size because of the way that you approach management. Do you find that to be more effective in this remote situation than it would be leaning on a producer more?
That's difficult for me to say because I've only really been with 2 or 3 organizations over the course of my 25 years, which I know is like weird and rare, but it was good. It was good for me. The integration of the producer role with the technical leads is really key for us, and the people involved don't necessarily have to focus on things that are not directly related to them. So like, we have multiple disciplines in terms of what stuff people are working on, and they can really be focused on that under the leadership of their leads versus necessarily a producer going and trying to assign out tasks.
Right, that definitely makes sense.
I've also found that it really comes down to your team too. If you have people that are really people that kind of step up and are self-starters, they're more than willing to do that, and their technical or design or artist job at the same time. But some teams are work differently depending on their personnel. So I've definitely been in both camps before.
Right. So are you finding that there are particular aspects of development that make this move to remote work more challenging, such as engaging with QA or doing console development?
I haven't done console development yet at Utopos, so I can't speak to that.
Well, I guess theoretically, I know that you've done console development before.
Oh, yeah. Theoretically, the issues I would have right now is there are certain consoles that are region locked. So like one of the issues we had at Tiny Build is there were certain regions that we had developers in that Nintendo would not ship dev kits there. So that's a problem a lot of people won't think of, is there are region lockings for certain hardware. One of our problems now that we're just getting started on some console stuff is there are multiple of us that write code and artists that want to see it on the console. But if we only have one, I may have it here in Seattle, then that means my Vegas team can't use it. If they have one in Vegas, I can't use it up here. So that part is a real challenge. You kind of need somebody in all locations that know how to push a build to a dev kit and that sort of thing.
Right.
I unfortunately fortunately or unfortunately, have not done any console development, so I really can't speak to that question.
It's fortunate or unfortunate depending on the console. They all have their challenges.
Well, so I mean, outside of console development, clearly, like engaging with QA is different now, since there's still like limitations on that. Are there any other challenges that you've encountered with this move to remote development?
In regards to QA?
Or anything in general?
Everything has a bit more of a lag. We can go and we can schedule a meeting and we can go and talk about things as much as we want, but we can't always, walk over to somebody's desk and be guaranteed, a bit of face time, even if it's just to ask a simple question. So you've got to budget in that you're potentially waiting on somebody for something into everything.
And there's a natural habit that when you're at home that your hours kind of change. Like you can't expect like Kris was just saying about lag time. You can't expect somebody where you're working in the middle of something, you're like, oh, I need to ask this question. You don't know for sure that they're there at their desk. Some people work later at night now that they're home. Some people work during the day. I have 2 kids, so they don't quite understand the concept of a closed door yet. So I tend to do more of my work after they all go to bed at night. In which case I can't text, my lead artist something, because he's probably asleep. Now there's lag. And it's easy to go over to somebody's desk and ask them when they're sitting there.
So with this lag, with people not being available always during work hours, are you seeing changes in the pipelines and processes that your studios normally use?
We tend to have weekly, if not more than weekly, meetings that kind of set the agenda. We're big on a really light scrum, so that every week we plan on what we're going to do for that week, and in hopes that we end up where we want it to be, which is light scrum. And you just have to trust your team that that's what they're working on. And then we have check-ins every morning over Slack saying, hey, this is what I got done, this is what I'm working, which is just like a daily stand-up. Everybody gets a chance to see what's going on, who's working on what, and if they have any problems that other people can bring up. But it's harder. You have to be more diligent in making sure those things happen. It's easy to let them slip when you're home.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I wish I could speak more about the project management side of things, but I'm more on the technical build and making sure everything's working aspect of things than how to daily lead a team on doing things. Certainly I've had teams in the past, but at this point I'm more of a freelancer Darth Vader sort of figure who has to go and just get something done.
Well, I imagine that there's probably a decent amount of technical problems that you've run into in this transition, right?
I would actually argue no in the case of our organization because we were already set up to allow people to work from home. On any given Friday in our org, half of the people would be working from home, and we support that work-life balance. And as long as you're getting your work done, we don't have a problem with it. So it was relatively easy for us to transition over, especially because we were very heavily invested in the Microsoft infrastructure in terms of using Office, Teams, and OneDrive for collaboration. It didn't matter if you were at your desk or at your home. And as an aside to that, from this whole situation, some people just literally packed up their desktop, took it home, and continued to work uninterrupted.
So I'd also like to add that unless you're a big company at this point, you should be doing all your stuff on the cloud. I say that because to me it's a whole lot easier. It makes more sense. At Utopos, we use G Suite for everything. So we have team drives that's where all of our stuff lives anyway, whether we're in the building or out of the building. We use GitHub with SourceTree, which is all online. We actually don't even have a server in our office because we quite frankly don't need one. So I highly recommend, if you're starting up something, to use it in the cloud.
Right.
I actually had thought of one really interesting technical challenge to go back to consoles that I might want to bring up.
Okay, sure, go for it.
If you're working on PlayStation requires your dev kits to have a static IP.
Yes.
And usually that IP is tied to your office.
Yep.
So that could be a real challenge.
Yeah,
hypothetically, other things other than PlayStation might also have that requirement. Hypothetically.
Yeah, I can definitely see that being a challenge, needing to VPN into your office IP to then interact with these development kits. One of the viewers commented that hardware going down in a business location when you're working remotely is definitely a challenge. Now, John, I know you said you weren't running servers, but does your company have a solution for handling that? Or Kris, do you have one?
I actually thought of that when I saw the question pop up in the chat, and that's kind of why I said, we do all cloud services. That's the major reason, because your hardware locally can go down whether you're there or not. If you lose a hard drive and need to replace it, you're screwed anyway. So yeah, if it goes down and somebody needs to go in and hit the reset button, yeah, that could be a problem. But none of it's a problem if you're doing everything in the cloud.
Do you think that...
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, do you think that console developers and platforms will be looking towards allowing more cloud testing and development for their hardware, or do you think that's reasonable?
No.
No.
No, there's no way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Unless it's Stadia, actually. Stadia is already in the cloud, so if you're developing for Stadia, then yeah, you can do that for that.
Fair enough.
Or iOS or mobile. Mobile's pretty good too. And if you're a Unity user, their cloud build can push directly to certain services as well. So you could do a cloud build in Unity, have it push directly to Steam, and download it from Steam and try out a new build as it is. So yeah, actually certain platforms do really good at that. The major console companies, not so much.
Fair. And Kris, you were going to say something before. What was that?
I was going to comment on the infrastructure stuff. So we are not pure cloud. We use a lot of cloud services, but if a tornado actually hit our building, it would be a pain in the ass until we restored backups from the cloud to get things going again. But we're at 50 plus people. We have enough scale that there does need to be some level of internal stuff to support things.
I can also see that if you grow to the size of Kris's company and you don't have a IT/security person watching over it all the time, it would be a lot easier to have leaks or data breaches because, you know, you might forget to turn off somebody's access, or somebody uses password as their password or something like that. So I could see an instance like that where you want to have something local.
That makes sense.
All our passwords are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Well, we use a 6 at the end, so
we
make sure
extra security there.
Very secure. Very secure.
So you noted that Oxide runs regular cloud backups. Does that happen on a daily basis or per commit? How are those backups generated?
They're on a schedule of about 12 hours in terms of backing up to the cloud, as well as another local machine in the office. You know, generally, everybody also has a local copy of the source that's of interest. So it's really more of a disaster recovery solution than anything else. But yeah.
That makes sense. So what software solutions are you and your teams using right now to maintain connections, to have these video calls, to do your task management? I know it was briefly mentioned before.
We mostly use Slack for all of our internal communications. We also have a Discord server, which we 99% of the time we use Slack. However, one of the interesting things is Discord does a better job at screen sharing. Slack's resolution tends to be lower. So when we have to do like intense art stuff, we tend to switch to Discord. So that's our communication, you know, because both of them support video chat, voice chat, all that stuff. We use Trello for task tracking, GitHub and SourceTree for all of our repository and source control, and we use G Suite for our email, data servers, calendar, all that stuff. That's the prime ones we use, and of course we're working on a game on Unity, so we have Unity. We do use Cloud Build, and yeah, those are the most things that we work together with.
That's quite the suite.
It's pretty sweet.
So we were longtime users of G Suite as a smaller corporation, but as we've grown, we've kind of moved into drinking the Microsoft Kool-Aid for everything. So Teams is our primary driver for communication, for chat, for screen sharing. Not so much for collaboration, because we're like, apart from the art team, we're not really collaborating on chat so much. Perforce as the back end for our source control, and a smattering of Linux things for internal VMs and VPN stuff.
Have you found
for instance, we're using open or Strong Swan on Ubuntu as our VPN solution at the moment.
Nice. Have you found that the transition to Microsoft Teams has helped with the integration between all of the different tools you're using, or is it about the same?
I mean, I feel it's definitely an area that Microsoft has had their eye on and been evolving, that everything works together in a seamless fashion. You know, G Suite for, you know, Gmail was a thing in 2005. It's no longer 2005. And being able to type into the same document as somebody else at the same time on Google Docs, was that really ever a thing? So from our perspective, being able to use tools that are interoperable with anything anybody else is using is quite convenient.
And I can see that too. Like, as a longtime G Suite user, it does kind of fall down when the whole reason we use Slack is because G Suite's solution for that isn't very solid. They don't really have much task tracking. They don't have any task tracking software, really. So yeah, I can see once we're growing, we consider something that Kris does.
Yeah. Great. Well, so it sounds like with all of this remote development, a lot of your developers are using their personal computers, though Kris, you did mention that some Oxide developers have taken their work computers home. Do you think there is any increased security risk for people using their own computers?
From our perspective, if you break into the building and come steal my hard drive, great, you've got an unfinished game. That's basically how we're assessing our security risk. You know, the IP is obviously valuable, but can you realistically monetize it by, you know, stealing it off somebody else's computer? Probably not. So we're not that concerned about it.
We are having a little bit of challenges with that. Since I would go down remotely, I actually have a really high-end Razer laptop. This thing's awesome. So my work computer is the one that goes with me everywhere. Another one of our guys has the same laptop, but we have one guy that uses his personal computer and he doesn't have a webcam, so we never get to do face calls with him, which has been a challenge. So if we had more funding, then we would definitely buy him a computer and probably a laptop, because we are so remote and always moving around.
Yeah, I know that webcam sales ended up really spiking, so the prices of webcams were through the roof for a while too.
I hadn't heard that, but that makes total sense.
You cannot buy webcams or lots of headsets for love or money these days.
Yeah, it's interesting how this pandemic has really changed the demand for the hardware peripherals.
Also, from a larger strategic perspective, it's also interesting to me that, like, you know, I've personally worked at companies where we did have the ability to work remote because, well, in some cases I was the one who provisioned that. And like I'm constantly on remote desktop to my office PC, even though I could work from my home PC. It's just more convenient for me to be centralizing things at one place. But this is kind of putting, you know, a challenge in the face of, like, can people effectively work from home? All right, maybe it's not as effective as it could be because we're all kind of scrambling, but, you know, yes, you can in fact work from home for stuff in the game industry.
So as an engineer, it might be a little easier to VPN in and use remote desktop, but I know that content creators face particular challenges for accessing content, especially when they have giant sound libraries or other things on computers that they would have to VPN into. Have there been any issues that your teams run into on that front, or do you have any recommendations for solutions to help mitigate those problems?
One of them is an education team. Content creators, and not to put people in categories, especially artists, tend to not understand source control and how that works. So you have to spend time educating them on how to do pulls, how to do pushes, you know, how to commit things, where they go, where they belong. So there is that challenge there. Working remotely all the time is the reason why we use a lot of, like, team drives with the G Suite so that we could pass information back and forth. Yeah, that's mostly it.
Okay.
Mostly we've been fortunate in terms of any of the recent hires, which we're still hiring during this thing, have been at least educated enough on source control to be able to manage most of that on their own. We have had to provision some additional hardware for people, and in a couple of cases, you know, some of the artists, you know, might have taken a Cintiq home, but actually a lot of our artists actually had Cintiqs at home already, so they just kind of transitioned over to using that.
We have had a touch of issues too. There are certain software suites that have to be tied to machines based on, like, key fobs. Those are pretty rare nowadays, right. But we have run into one instance where it was like, oh, we need to go in the office and disconnect the license to this machine so I can put it on my machine at home.
Yeah,
no, that's actually a great point. One of the things that the software industry has evolved to over the last few years is the subscription-based model, especially in terms of art software, though most of those, especially Adobe and Autodesk, basically let you have 2 instances, so you can have a home and a work environment without too much of a fuss. I will say that the audio software industry is notably lacking in that regard, with their still demands for key fobs and other weird shit. But that's on them.
Yes, I've heard.
We're also have deeply considered moving to Blender, simply because it gets around some of these issues, and Blender's kind of gotten really amazing over the last year or two.
Yeah, I have definitely heard more praise and seen a lot more artists even trying to ramp up on Blender if they're even if their background is in Maya.
Yeah, and as a small company, we appreciate the $0 price point.
Yeah, and I guess it's particularly unfortunate that the audio industry is so strict about these keys, because when it comes to doing like remote desktop into a computer with audio sources, it's really hard to hear those properly. So I know that's a big challenge there. So what are some other issues and workarounds when it comes to VPN and remote desktop protocol?
We've had some issues with using remote desktop. It can be kind of slow, so it's really hard to play test on.
Yeah.
Especially if you're doing something Twitch based. Yeah.
So
getting somebody hardware too, like sorry, Kris.
No, go ahead.
So doing mobile, if you're doing iOS or Android, we've tried a couple of builds on our machine on Android, but not everybody has an Android device at home. So we've actually gone ahead and got a lower end Android device for one employee because they needed one to test.
That makes sense. I'm sure that hardware purchases went up quite significantly when this remote work was starting to be enforced.
So we're very PC focused at the moment. Mobile isn't even a factor for us. The interesting thing has been, we actually do perform well over remote desktop. In terms of somebody who was running the game on their office PC from home, as opposed to running it locally. But we're in a part of the country where access to fiber and fast internet is very affordable, and it's basically everybody has it. So like you can't walk out of the house without tripping over a 100 megabit connection. And we have a gig to the office, so it's not been a burden for us in terms of scaling out, as people basically just need to sync their checkouts, a couple of times a day or whatever. And it's not really a burden on our infrastructure.
Right. Well, certainly I'm in your area, and I know that I get a gigabit connection for $80 a month, which is really affordable. But
oh my goodness!
Yeah, if you were
we have Comcast in our area.
Yeah, don't worry, Comcast really wants me to switch back over to them. But if your studio was based in a location that didn't have as great as fiber access and networks, what would you do to help ease the burden of all of the VPN connections or other things that are required?
Oh, I would have built it. I would have moved it all to Azure or AWS.
So go to the cloud, basically.
Yeah.
We explored that, and we're literally on the backbone of the internet here, and even then, it wasn't worth the effort to continue to pay someone a monthly fee versus just having the small amount of infrastructure internally that we needed, as well as using the cloud for backups.
Makes sense. So have there been really any other challenges or any concerns that you've heard expressed from your peers within the game industry during these times around technology?
Around technology? Not ones that we haven't discussed yet that I can think of off the top of my head.
I don't think it's the technology aspects. I think it's the sociological impacts of, having this different workflow, having kids at home and trying to manage their stuff as well as your own on an hour by hour basis. And that's where I feel that we're having the most challenges.
Right.
Actually, I just thought of one technical challenge that we're having is, for some reason in 2020, we still have not figured out how to get headphone speakers and microphones to work properly. So between using Skype, Slack, Discord, Hangouts, all the various different types of stuff, I swear, 25% of the time it's like, wait, I can't hear you. My mic's not working. Let me try to figure it out. That's actually one of the technical challenges that we've had as well.
It's not like that was a technical challenge 40 minutes ago either.
Of course not. You're experts.
It happens all the time. Why is it so hard? It's 2020.
Yeah, I think a big issue around that can be you just have different programs fighting for control over cameras and mics, which can only do one in. I think a lot of people forget, because they can have output through multiple systems, that they can't have input to multiple softwares at the same time.
I'm not entirely convinced Microsoft didn't stop developing anything around DirectX audio around 2010. So that's just weird. But
Right,
yeah.
Right.
But what Kris was saying about like the mental health and the sociological things those things are real, and technology can help some of those, but those are ones not to be dismissed. Oddly enough, one of the technical things that helps me is I found that I have to get up and go for a walk every day, and Pokemon Go is a great driver for that.
Right. Certainly, getting up and moving around, getting out of the house is a good way to maintain your mental health. And it's great that you can play video games while doing it.
Yeah.
I also heard that the Ring Fit, the newest thing from Nintendo, is completely sold out because everyone wants to play games while working out in their house. And I'm sure VR headset sales are up as well.
Yeah, I know somebody who just got an Index, and I'm like, hey, want to hang out and not socially distance?
To play Half-Life Alyx, perhaps?
That's really the only reason, yes.
Fair. So, with all of this conversation, are there any changes that you think are going to happen when it comes to the infrastructure of technology, of pipelines, of process, of game studios going forward? Are we going to see this as a changing point of how game studios handle development and set up those development pipelines?
I really think that especially the smaller game studios are going to realize they don't need an office. There is a substantial added cost for maintaining office. Now, if you're over probably 20 people, you probably want to keep the office. But if you're sub 15, there's going to be studios that are really starting to question whether they should spend that money every month on just office space.
What he said.
Yeah, I mean, I know people that work at Pokemon that are starting to say, you know what, we've already talked about loosening our have to be in office requirements, because it's clear to me that we can do this without being in the office. So maybe we only make it mandatory that you only need to be in office 3 days a week instead of all 5, that sort of thing. I think we're going to see a somewhat major shift in that kind of thinking.
I think it's going to depend on the scale of the company too. Like, I'm not going to throw out any names of like big East Coast or West Coast studios, but like there's limits to how far their granularity can go in terms of everybody working from home versus being on a team that requires 300 people. When you're on a team that's like 15, 20, or in our case, like basically 50 people pulling on the same oars, I think that's one thing. But when there is a level of scale where that doesn't quite work out.
Do you think
it also depends on your people too? If you don't have a lot of self-starters or people that get distracted easily, being in the office helps solve some of those problems. Being at home, you just got to monitor performance. Really, you got to really watch. There's always going to be some people that thrive when they're at home, and other people's that are just their productivity is going to drop, and you have to be aware of that and work with them to figure out solutions either to bring up their productivity or, make sure you're back in the office as soon as possible.
Do you find that the task tracking software you're using is a good way to track productivity, or how are you doing that?
We're currently small enough that the task tracking is more of a high-level type of thing. Once you get bigger, it's a different story. I'm sure Kris could speak to that.
I mean, no, I can't, because again, I'm Darth Vadering around the Empire, as opposed to managing the day-to-day management of the project. But so far we're doing okay.
So, John, you noted that larger companies will have a harder time moving fully remotely. Do you think we're going to see the rise of mid-sized remote studios?
Specifically remote, depends on what you just define mid-size. I honestly think once you get over 20, then you have to have office time, because then you're managing way too many different people. Actually, come to think of it, one of the big issues we've had is compartmentalization of information. So one person talks to another person, and since it's on video chat or voice chat, nobody else hears it. So you have this section of people know this bit of information, that section of people knows that bit of information, and they don't know what each other has. It's not like they're sitting in an office and seeing those two people talk. So we've had to be much more diligent about making sure that everybody's speaking together. We have more video calls as a group, because it's the fragmentation of information has been a problem.
That makes sense. How large is your studio right now?
Right now we're 8.
8. Okay, so that makes sense. You can have literally everybody in the studio on the same call. But
right.
Kris, with the size of Oxide, having everyone in the same call would be quite the cacophony. So what are you doing to help solve those communication issues? I know this isn't your expertise here as Darth Vader.
Yeah, I don't have a good answer to that. Sometimes you don't know what you don't know.
Fair enough.
In this case, I don't have a good answer to that, because we segment stuff into the various teams, and they're also communicating on their own. But I'm not necessarily overseeing every one of those things, so I can't speak to it.
So if you could go back in time and have a conversation with yourself 10 months ago to prepare your studio for this, is there anything that you would have told yourself to do, or anything you would have changed?
Well, I would have shorted oil.
Yeah. I would have released a game as quickly as possible so we can take advantage of the rise of the buying of video games.
We're fortunate in that we're funded for being able to do our development at the moment, and our publisher has been very supportive. So it hasn't been a huge disruption apart from the communications issues, and general sociological ones as well. But that's a privileged experience, I guess I would say.
I would say that, in all honesty, going back, I would have focused on 2 things: is complete communication between all of them. I mean, communication is really the biggest challenge over all this. We use the software, but even using the great software, communication is still a bit more difficult. I would have made sure that the entire team focused on it. And secondly, I would have taken real time to ramp up everybody on the team on the technology itself, how to get stuff into source control, how to use team drives, that sort of thing, simply because it was all being funneled through one person, and now that person isn't readily available, and we should have taken the time so that everybody understood that technology and how to get things in the game themselves.
So do you think you're going to be changing your ramp-up process and onboarding for new hires going forward?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, because, I mean, it would be ideal to hire somebody that already knows how to do all that stuff, but not only do we want them to understand the technology, but I feel like everybody should be able to actively contribute to any project. And if you don't know how to check something into source control, you're not actively contributing.
Makes sense. So if you were to be giving advice to another person running a studio or helping with the technology management of a studio, and they could only get one piece of advice about how to best handle switching to remote development, what is the key piece of information or the best piece of advice that you would give them? And it can be something that we've already talked about.
Be very, very diligent about communication. Make sure that you're having group video chat, voice chat on a very consistent basis. Make sure that there isn't compartmentalization of information. Make sure that everybody's feels open to sharing and talking about it in open Slack channels and whatnot. Communication is by far the most difficult process of all this. And even you can't just use the tools that are available. You have to use them as best you can.
Yeah. You can't fix not being able to talk to someone and figure something out. I can do all the work I want to provide cloud solutions to make sure that people's machines and processes and whatever work, but until you're actually collaborating with someone and getting the work done, you're not actually making a product, and ultimately, then what are you doing?
Right, definitely. So I'm going to inquire to our Twitch viewers. If you have any questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat now. I see that we already have one up there, so I'll be going into that. So one of our viewers asked, do you think companies will have to do something to make employees' work from home environments better, especially for the long-term from home conditions? Is this an employer's responsibility? And will they rise to the occasion or try to avoid taking responsibility? Long question.
I don't think it's a black and white thing. Like, you can't say it's all one or all the other. I do think that companies shouldn't be draconian about it, but I also don't think that employees should just be like, oh, free vacation. It needs to be something in between. I am a big fan of making sure productivity is there based on goals. So using task tracking, say, okay, this is what I expect by the end of the week. I don't mind flexibility if you have to work at midnight because it's the best time you can work. Great. I also like work-life balance in that if I send out a Slack message at 7 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, I better not expect a reply until Monday morning. So there are ways. I mean, it's up to both, I guess, is the point. It's up to both. If you're an employee, try to be the best employee that you can regarding the situation. And if you're an employer, try to enable your employees to be the best they can, but also don't hover over them. If they're working from home and they need hardware, get them the hardware. If they need a new computer or a phone or a video camera, get that to them. So that's my answer.
Yeah, I'll just basically echo that. You need to be able to enable your people to be able to do their stuff, whether that's in the midst of this pandemic or whether it's just like, oh, hey, it's a Thursday, I've got to take the kid to the doctor and I need to work from home, and I'll, as long as I'm getting my stuff done, we're fine.
Right. Well, so clearly with both the switch to remote development and the struggles of managing the extra stresses from having kids at home, from the world being on fire, people aren't working at 100% right now. Do you think we're going to see the delay of more game launches or even possibly the next set of upcoming consoles?
I actually don't know if you can say everybody's going to slow down. I have actually experienced the opposite. It is an odd thing where some people, they spend a lot of day now, they see their family all the time and they love their family, but sometimes going to work is a break. So some people I've seen actually work more right now just because they get to get away from the things that they're seeing every single day now. So I do think some things will be delayed. Some things have absolutely slowed down, but in some ways they've also sped up. It really depends on the person. It really depends on the person.
That makes sense. And the team.
I think the movie industry is in for a hard hit. I think our TV entertainment is going to be a little weird come 2021, but I fully expect that the consoles are still going to be coming out on time. Whether or not those are going to come out with all the launch titles that the publishers might have wished is an open question, but they haven't announced that yet. So who can say what reality changed?
Right. Well, clearly we've been seeing game sales and console sales going up, even when you don't consider Animal Crossing and Doom Eternal's release. Do you think we're still going to see an increased consumption of video games as people are dealing with social isolation?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I also think that it's going to, that you'll see if you map the trend of video game players over time. Yeah, it spikes right now, but I think you'll also see an overall increase after this is over, because I'm sure that we're finding gamers that didn't know they were gamers before this.
I mean, you can't buy a Switch at the moment is basically the bottom line. And other consoles are also a little bit scanty, but some of that is people waiting for, the new console launches this winter. And not anything really coming out right now. No offense, Doom. No offense, Animal Crossing. But yeah, it's only going to continue to accelerate. It's boom times for the game industry if you can get your products out.
And
there are some annoyances that I hope get fixed. Like, I do have a family and we own 2 Switches. But if I buy a digital game, it gets tied to the Switch that is my primary Switch. So if my kids want to play one thing on one Switch and one thing on the other Switch, they often can't, because I'm playing on my Switch and they can't play a digital game that's on the other one because it says, let's see if you can play this game. You can't, because John's not logged in. John's not playing this one.
That's on Nintendo.
Oh, it's on Nintendo.
The other figured this out.
Oh, I know, and it's kind of, I think it's kind of silly, but I'm hoping that this kind of situation makes them rethink those things.
Right. So we have another question. How important is the social connectivity to the productivity of a game development team? Most are working remotely with folks that were co-located. As new members are hired in without that social connection, how would you connect them?
Again, I think mostly communication. Video chat is the best thing that you can get without actually being there in person. And if I was onboarding somebody, I would make sure that we spent real time every day with them, with the team, discussing, talking, FaceTime, that sort of thing, because that's super important. Like I said before, it's all about communication.
Right.
Yeah, we've only brought on 2 new people in the last month. Though we are still hiring. Please visit our website. Look for a job. Yeah, you've got to be in regular touch with people. Know what they're doing, know what's expected of them, and be able to communicate that.
Have you found that the video calls that you're having, the meetings that you're having, are kind of different than they would be in the office? Is there more casual conversation that would normally be sort of water cooler conversation?
I've noticed the opposite, actually. It's our conversations tend to be very much direct and to the point. We have some water cooler moments, but really more of them is like, hey, I'm having this problem. Let's talk about it. And I had another point and it escaped me. So go ahead, Kris.
Yeah, we're very focused on any of our video calls, with the exception of ogling whatever new Millennium Falcon background I've got on my video chat, because I have several. But by and large, it's strict and to the point. And any water cooler stuff is, like while we're waiting for something else to happen.
Okay, interesting.
Actually, one of the interesting shifts I personally have had to make is, in the past, a video call was something that's like, hey, it's big, it's planned, this is an hour for our meeting, we're going to do a video call. But I've learned over the last couple months, or actually since we've been working, it's okay to just be like, oh, I don't have to plan for this. It could just be a quick 2-minute jump on a video and talk to each other. It's kind of maybe because I'm much older, a mindset shift I've had to make.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. So one of our viewers asked, in terms of tools, at a personal level, is there anything that you're using or recommending for better productivity? I personally
closing any social media, making sure you don't open up any social media pages.
No social media. Ban social media. Okay.
There are software that you can. I forget what it is, but I've seen software where you can force your computer to not go to certain pages during certain times.
Yeah.
If you're someone who.
It's called Cold Turkey, and I definitely do not have that installed on all of my machines.
I know some people who use that as well. Personally, I use the Google Suite a lot. So I have calendar events for everything, including blocking out working times. I have Google reminders that go off. In case I think of something randomly, I'll be like, hey, Google, remind me tomorrow morning that I should look into fundraising from AT&T. And then, of course, I have even Google Keep that I use and Google Documents that I use, where I just track tons of things. I really like checklists, so Google Keep is something that I find very satisfying, more for my personal life than for my work.
Yeah. I also use Google Keep and find it very handy, especially for shopping lists.
I use my shopping list on there too.
I have been thinking about, and I know people who specifically do put on their calendar self-care time. Like, here's a meeting at 3:30 for me to go take a walk. And not only does it remind me, it also lets everybody know at the office, because my internal calendar is shared, that, oh, I might not be available this time because I'm taking my daily walk.
Right.
I don't have kids, but I've found that I've reverted to college, and sometime around 5:30, it might be time for a 30-minute nap.
30-minute nap? What is this 30-minute nap you speak of?
And then I come back online and work until 10.
How long are your naps, John?
I have 2 kids. There's no such thing. They don't exist.
Fair. So one of our viewers asked, are video calls a must? Are there any considerations for blind or accessibility developers? Or are there calls as just audio only? Or is there distancing issues?
To me, it's a scale. Like, text is the first step. You can communicate ideas over text, but it's hard. Video calls are kind of the next step, and that way you get to hear intonation, you get to hear intent. Video calls is then the next step above that, because you can actually see facial recognition or facial expressions, and then of course person to person in person is to me the best way to do it, but obviously we can't right now. And for anybody that deals with a disability, I just go as high as you can on that ladder.
Yeah, I try and default to text initially, and then if we're going to have a chat, I will try and do a video just as a courtesy. It's like, I'm here, you're here, let's do this thing.
It's also really nice just to see other people.
That's true. It's been a pleasure to see you both, even though you can't see me right now. So we're really wrapping up here. This is the end of our slotted time. I wanted to thank you both so much for joining us. And before we leave, is there anything that you'd like to say, leave our audience with, tell them about job openings or promote your studio? Just go for it. John, why don't you start?
Sure. You can follow me at John Combs. I'm sure Renee is going to put this up there. My company is Utopos Games. You can go to utoposgames.com. Utopos is like Utopia, but with with OS at the end of it. Follow us. We announced our game called Rivo, which is a training your robots to go in an auto battler, but we're actually using real machine learning so that they'll fight the way you train them to fight. So you can read all about it on our website. We're really excited about it. So yeah, that's us.
Great.
Don't follow me on Twitter because I only read Twitter and don't actually post things there because it's a cesspool. But you can find job openings at oxidegames.com. I can't tell you what we're working on, but if you look at the job descriptions and read between the lines, maybe you can figure it out.
Wonderful. And I would like to thank both of you and all of our viewers for joining us. I'd like to give special note to Xbox for helping sponsor this session, and I would like to thank Take This for providing mental health support to gamers and game developers. Again, if you'd like to donate to Take This, donate in the link below. And if you're interested in becoming a game developer or furthering your skills and careers as a game developer, join us as an IGDA member. Just go to igda.org and you can find all of the membership options there. We'd love to have you be part of our community. Kris, John, thank you so much for your time today. And viewers, thank you so much for joining us.
Stay safe.
Take care.
Yeah, stay safe.
Bye.
Bye.